Good day, everybody. Welcome to the Bible in a Year 2021. We are on day 151, and we are looking at 1 Kings chapters 3 and 4. So just to start off, just something to note here. And I'm simply going to read this because I wrote it. So from the beginning, Solomon got off on the wrong foot. You got to underline that. He got off on the wrong foot. He was not supposed to marry foreign women. As king, he was not allowed to accumulate too much wealth, own too many horses, and have too many wives. This we found way back with Moses when the Lord was putting in place allowances for a king. That shocked some people because they believed that when this happened, when Israel started crying out for a king, that it was unexpected. It was not. It was back with Moses that Yahweh established that, he knew that eventually Israel was going to ask for a king, and he said that he reserved the right to choose who the king would be. And there was a law that he put in place that the king would have to follow. And that's what it is here with what I'm naming. And this was in order so that the king could not become independent of Yahweh. That he would still have to be reliant upon Yahweh, and also that so the king wouldn't become an imbalance to the four pillars of Israel's government. And you remember I was teaching earlier that the four pillars included the high priest, the head judge, the king, and the prophet. Now let's going forward. Now let's see what Solomon does here. Verse 1. Solomon became the son-in-law of Pharaoh, Egypt's king, when he married Pharaoh's daughter. First of all, he married a foreign woman. Second of all, he has now made alliances with Egypt, and Yahweh had warned them not to go back to Egypt. They were not to have any reliance on Egypt whatsoever. And here Solomon, before he does anything else, he has made alliances with Egypt by marrying this foreign woman, Pharaoh's daughter. So he brought her into David's city until he finished building his royal palace, the Lord's temple, and the wall around Jerusalem. So like that's not getting off on the best foot, but at the same time, he's ignorant. He's not like David. He didn't have the understanding of David at this point. He didn't have the relationship David had with Yahweh. And we see, and we have to understand, because of the promise that Yahweh made it to David, there's grace that's extended to Solomon. And we read here that the king went to the great shrine at Gibeon in order to sacrifice there. Now, the shrine is the fact, remember that David brought the ark, the presence of the Lord, into Jerusalem, but he didn't bring the whole tent meeting with it. He didn't bring the altar for the sacrifices into that place. And people turned that altar into a shrine. So this is where Solomon goes. It's significant. It's where he goes to make sacrifices. So it says here, he used to offer 1,000 entirely burned offerings on that altar. The Lord appeared to Solomon at Gibeon. Now this is grace right here. This is a great deal of grace. Solomon, is doing things in a way that he shouldn't do, and we can chalk it up to ignorance at this stage, but he shouldn't have been doing this. So the Lord appeared to Solomon at Gibeon in a dream at night. God said, "Ask whatever you wish, and I'll give it to you." This wasn't because Solomon was some great guy. That's the point I want to make here. It was not because Solomon is some great guy. This is because Solomon is the son of David, and Yahweh has made promises to David concerning Solomon. So this is Yahweh fulfilling his promise to David. But we also see here some vulnerability. Solomon doesn't feel prepared. Solomon is not the oldest. We don't know at what stage. I'm sure with some research we could figure it out, but at what stage David was actually told that Solomon would be the king. He wasn't bred from his birth, because he's way down the line in order of sons. But yet it is Yahweh's prerogative to choose who will be king, and he chose Solomon. And so this is his feeling now, and he expresses it here in verse 7. And now, Lord my God, you have made me, your servant, king in my father David's place. But I'm young and inexperienced. I know next to nothing. So this is the feeling that we have here from Solomon. And we can see he's already made mistakes. And then we have the famous request. We dealt with this already, but let's just do the recap of it in verse 9. Please give your servant a discerning mind in order to govern your people and to distinguish good from evil, because no one is able to govern this important people of yours without your help. There's a position of humility right there. Sometimes when we hear something from the Lord, we just run with it, and we do it all in our strength, and that's not the way it's supposed to work. It's supposed to work exactly like this. Oh Lord, equip me, please, because I can't do this without you. That is the sense of what is where we're supposed to be. That's exactly where Solomon was. He realized this task was more than he was. He was called to something that was bigger than himself. So he needed the help of Yahweh in order to be able to do this. So he's asking for that discernment. He's asking for the wisdom that he's going to need. And then we have the promise. This is an incredible thing. This is an incredible promise that is given in verse 11 to 14. I wanted to keep it here in its entirety. God said to him, because you have asked for this instead of requesting long life, wealth, or victory over your enemies, asking for discernment so as to acquire good judgment, I will now do just what you said. I will now do just what you said. Look, I hereby give you a wise and understanding mind. He touches him. He anoints him for this moment in history as King of Israel. There has been no one like you before now, nor will there be anyone like you afterward. I now also give you what you didn't ask for, wealth and fame. There won't be a king like you as long as you live. And if you walk in my ways and obey my laws and commands, just as your father David did, then I will give you a very long life. So there's a couple of different things going on here. The whole first part of this is the fulfillment of Yahweh's promise to David. This last bit here, we talk about if he obeys his laws and commands, then he'll give him long life. That is specific to Solomon. These other things really are due to David. He needs Solomon to be successful. He's guaranteeing him that for the sake of Israel. But this other part, the long life part, that is specific to Solomon, if Solomon is willing to walk in his ways. It's good stuff. And then we see it brings about a change right away in verse 15. Solomon awoke and realized it was a dream. He went to Jerusalem, and what did he do? He left that shrine and he went to the presence. He moved from sacrifice to presence. Man, if he'd only continued in that. See, the presence was more important to David than the sacrifice. And this is where Solomon now moves into this understanding, at least for a period of time. He went to Jerusalem and stood before the chest containing the Lord's covenant. Then he offered entirely burnt offerings and well-being sacrifices and held a celebration for all his servants. Wow. And then in verse 28, we have a demonstration of the wisdom of the gift that has been received. all Israel heard about the judgment that the king made. And if you remember, it was the argument between the two prostitutes about the children. One child had died, and one of the women took the live child of the other woman and claimed it was hers. And you know how the whole story plays out. That Solomon said, "Fine, cut the child in half and give half to each woman." And the woman's whose child it was, turned around and said, "No, I'd rather the child live. Just give the child to the other woman." And Solomon could discern right away who the child actually belonged to. So and this became very famous. And so all Israel heard about the judgment that the king made. Their respect for the king grew because they saw that God's wisdom was in him, so he could execute justice. And then we have this little insight here in chapter 4, and we see when they asked for a king, they were warned what the cost would be. And here we see some of the costs. Solomon had 12 officers over all Israel. They supplied the king and his palace with food. Each would provide the supplies for 1 month per year. So each of these regions that these officers oversaw would have the responsibility of supplying the king for a 1 month period. And it was quite a lot of stuff they would have to provide for him. But there's also then the benefit of having a good king. And we see in verse 25, the people of Judah and Israel from Dan all the way to Beersheba lived securely under their vines and fig trees throughout the days of Solomon. This is the responsibility of the king, to provide security to their citizens. That's what a king is supposed to do: provide prosperity, provide the opportunities to earn a good living, to provide security. And that's exactly what they had with Solomon. So it would be well worth the cost it would take to keep the king. And here's just a few things to note about this king of peace. And in verse 29 to 31, and God gave Solomon wisdom and very great understanding, insight as long as the seashore itself. Solomon's wisdom was greater than all the famous Easterners, greater even than all the wisdom of Egypt. He was wiser than anyone, more wise than Ethan the Ezrahite or Mahal's sons, Heman, Calcol, and Darda. His reputation was known throughout the region. A fulfilled promise. But not only was there this wisdom, but Solomon was also he was an artist and a scientist. Look at this. Solomon spoke 3,000 proverbs and 1,005 songs. He described the botany of trees, whether the cedar in Lebanon or the hyssop that grows out of the wall. He also described cattle, birds, anything that crawls on the ground, and fish. He was a well-rounded guy. It would be very interesting to sit down and have a conversation with Solomon. But on top of that, Solomon was also a celebrity. So people came, in verse 34, people came from everywhere to listen to Solomon's wisdom. Even the earth's kings who had heard about his wisdom came. Yeah, they all wanted the autograph of Solomon. There's no doubt that the Lord raised him to quite the stature. He fulfilled his promise to Solomon if Solomon had only remained faithful. Okay, so thank you for that. I hope that you picked out a few things from there that will give you something to chew on for today. And you guys be blessed, be encouraged, and we'll catch up again tomorrow. God bless.